I caught a little bit of Greg's presentation there at the end. The one thing I want to emphasize, and I'm sure you've already seen this, but it's actually a pretty cool thing. You get different perspectives from different pros being up here. What works for one guy might not work for the other, or vice versa. But it's really cool in my opinion, and I try to listen to other pros do their seminars to learn and to see some things that maybe works for them, always trying to learn. But it's really, really interesting how a lot of things are similar, but then some things and some beliefs and some instincts are totally different. And that's why at takeoff or at blast off, when 100 elite pros take off, they go, hopefully about 90 directions. Sometimes there's 9 people sitting where you want to be, but hopefully in a lot of different directions because people have different mindsets. And it's really cool with this format that Bass University has to have different people, a guy from Arkansas, Louisiana, South Carolina, New York, all over the country, and we're trying to catch these little green fish and brown fish too. So that being said, topics are similar with us guys, but you get a lot of different perspectives. I heard Greg talking about hooks quite a bit, and I agree with some things he said, and I've had some bad luck with some things, but he does what works for him, so does Pete, so does Mike, so does Ish, all those people. And it's really a neat situation we have here, having everyone. That being said, if you have questions or if something works for you or something hasn't worked for you and you want to ask me, feel free to raise your hand, okay? I love to interact with the group. I love to feel like that we're communicating. The thing that can be challenging in this format is we have people that haven't fished very much, maybe they just want to become a bass fisherman, and you have people that are tournament veterans. So you have to try to talk to everyone. So don't feel like a question you might ask might be a silly question or a dumb question, that sort of thing, because there is no such thing. I can't tell you how many times I've had 50-year-old men come up to me after everything's over because they happen to get me and say, would you show me how to tie the knot that you tie? Something that seems that simple, but you don't have to be embarrassed about that, okay? All right, that being said, let's get started with the topic, cranking. And first thing I've got up there is why crank. The reason that I crank and the reason I think most pros and tournament fishermen crank is because you can cover so much water and you can get clues and figure out what the fish are doing, where they're located, what type of cover they're using, that sort of thing. We cover water. As a weekend fisherman or as a full-time professional bass fisherman, we have one thing in common. It's limited time on the water. And you say, well, if you fish for a living, how's your time so limited? That's what you do. Well, most of our tournaments have a 30-day off limits, and we practice 2.5 days. So you got 2.5 days to figure out a lake that maybe I've never been on before, maybe it's been 5 years, that sort of thing. Prime example, our second elite tournament this year is at Falcon Lake. I fished there one time about 4 years ago. It's a huge lake, tons of cover. If I go there and start fishing very slowly and I fish, our practice day is 10, 12 hours a day. If I only cover a quarter mile of shoreline or a quarter mile of offshore structure in that one day, then I'm going to cover such a small fraction of that lake. I want to get to see as much as I can, and I do that by fishing crankbaits. Now, I've won tournaments cranking. I actually finished second in the Bassmaster Classic deep cranking. And, it's a great way to win tournaments. Lots of tournaments are won, but I use cranking to locate fish. I've won more tournaments when I've slowed down and fished and flipped and fished a mop jig and that sort of thing. But cranking is something I always do. It's usually the first thing I do when I go to a lake. That's what I'm going to start doing, and covering water, okay? We cover more water, and the cool thing, my 2 mics are hitting. They're battling up there. The cool thing is you covered the whole water column. We got crankbaits that run extremely deep. We got crankbaits that run right on the surface and everywhere in between. So that's a really cool thing. The depth of water you're fishing is something you want to find a common depth that you can pinpoint when you're fishing and once you do pattern some fish. But where those fish move in the water column is huge. And they'll do that from day to day, different times of the day. They'll suspend. Sometimes they'll get on the bottom. It's very, very important to be able to cover different spectrums of the water column, okay? A real quick example of that is when I won the Classic, I had an area, I had eliminated, the Louisiana Delta is a huge, huge, hundreds of miles of fishable water. In my pre-fishing time, I found an area that I knew had good quality fish. That's 90% of what you got to find out. So once you find that area, then it's being able to catch those fish and to relate to those fish and understand where those fish are and what they're relating to. And in the Classic, the first morning of the tournament, because I didn't practice there because I didn't even want to be seen there, the first morning of the tournament, I hadn't really fished there in a couple months. So I had to figure out where those fish were in the water column. It's typically shallow water in the whole area, so that wasn't such a big deal how deep, but you needed to know where those fish were in that water column. The water was extremely hot. It's the Louisiana Delta. It was hot from top to bottom because people talk about, well, they should have been deeper. But really, when you've had it's late summer and it's been 100-degree days, that water was 90 degrees from top to bottom. Bad water quality, really. And that was the key to me being able to figure out where those fish were. I had a hunch that those fish were going to be up in the water column just because of water quality, okay? But I started out first morning in the Classic, and I actually had a log in a little section of the area that I ended up fishing in that I had caught several fish on in practice. It was like a guaranteed deal. I knew the fish were there every time I had fished it, the few times I had fished it. So I started right there. And the first thing I did is early in the morning, it's summertime, it's the Bassmaster Classic, and boy, there's nothing like throwing a buzz bait and reeling across the top of the water hoping the one's going to explode on it. First thing I did, because the water's only about 5 feet deep there, is throw a buzz bait right by a log. There's a little grass clump that had moved up on that log. And I threw a buzz bait right by it 2 or 3 times, nothing. So the next thing I did is I thought, well, they're deeper. So I picked up a heavy sinker on a bacon rind. That's the bait I actually won the tournament on, with like a 1/2 ounce or 3/4 ounce sinker. And I pitched it past the log and I let it sink to the bottom, and I fished slowly where the log actually touched the bottom, thinking the fish might be down on the bottom. Nothing. Well, I've got so much confidence, and this is if you've got a place you've got confidence in, you can learn so much, because I felt very confident there was a fish there, or maybe multiple fish, what I needed to do to trigger a strike. So my second technique did not work either. So the next thing I did is I picked up a crankbait. There again, I'm thinking I need to cover water. I pick up a crankbait that dives 5 to 6 feet deep, and I cast out and I fish all around different angles around this log. Didn't get a bite. And I'm thinking, dang, this is bad. This is my best little target here, and I can't get a bite. So then I pick up a shallow running crankbait that only runs about 2 feet deep, make a cast at the log, I catch a 3-pounder.
I subscribe to Bass U TV, and so should you.
Great place to learn about anything you want to know about bass fishing.
You get it at Bass U. We got the best of the best.
I'm not just an instructor, I'm a subscriber.
I'm John Cruz, and I am a subscriber.
You can always learn, and watching Bass U definitely helps with that. It's something that I like to do, and it's definitely something that you need to do.
If I'm still learning, you should be too.
Subscribe to Bass U because you'll learn how to catch a lot more fish.